Much
You're
appreciated.
welcome.
This would be really hard, just me doing it, so I'm glad
Action.
you're here. Okay. Quiet on the set. Okay. All right. Yeah, we're good?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, thanks. So, tell me about your experience with some of the faculty
Oh, yeah.
at Fort Mason and elsewhere.
Okay. At Fort Mason, we had some pretty good teachers. Some of them were actually working artists and had been recognized for their talent in printing and in etchings and engravings. And so this one teacher who was sort of the reigning cranky woman in the department would give people a lot of guff if they weren't doing things according to Hoyle. And I fit that category of kind of an outlaw maverick kind of a guy. I always sort of listened to a different drummer and found myself often wanting to do it my way, kind of a Sinatra approach. And so we would lock horns, this woman and I, and she would say things like, Alex, this is wonderful, but you know, it's not the appropriate technique for that style of printing. And I would say, okay, all right, and go off and do what I wanted to do. And it just reminded me that throughout life, I've always taken kind of a different stance, often. And sometimes it's gotten me in trouble. I could think of an example that's maybe not art related, but it's certainly something that strikes me as being a good example of iconoclasm.
It's a good word.
I was at the university, and it was required that we take ROTC.
Really?
And,
Required?
Yeah, and this is going back now to the mid-60s. And this is pre-Vietnam, or almost Vietnam. And so I and a couple of my buddies were not particularly interested in the military approach to things. I can't say I was a conscious objector, because I didn't really have a strong philosophical stance on this. I just didn't want to be dressed up as an army guy.
More nonconformist, would it be fair to say?
Exactly.
Just in your orientation, the idea of rank and file and snap to grid is not for you, right?
Sure.
Oh, sure. Yeah, it's fine. I think it's okay. Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, so one day I thought, well, I've got to do something dramatic. Otherwise, I'm just going to be conscripted. The idea was that if you completed 4 years of college and stayed in the Army ROTC program, you would be gifted with a commissioned officer status and go into the military as a second lieutenant. So this is a pretty good deal, because it means that you are not enslaved. You are actually eating not in the mess hall, but in a special building for officers, and you are treated differently, and you are saluted and respected. So that was the premise of this program. So I wanted no part of that. I have no intentions of staying with it. So one day we were amassed on the football field with, we were supposed to have our rifles and go through the procedure, the manual of arms, and do all these funny routines. And I never could get them straight. It always seemed that I was either going left when I should have been right, or forward when I should have been advancing, or backwards.
Yeah.
So one day I just grabbed this heavy-duty rifle that was not for us. And I went out on the field with this big rifle, which was loaded, and and immediately I was spotted by a commanding officer. He came over and read me the riot act in public in front of all my cohorts and colleagues, and I was kicked off the field and suspended from ROTC immediately. So I thought, this is not so bad. You know,
right, so he was taken off the table, right.
But people were saying, geez, how horrible, you lost out. You could have been a second lieutenant. I said, no.
Did you have any crocodile tears for them?
I didn't.
Yeah.
I should say, in all seriousness, a lot of those second lieutenants did not return from a tour of Vietnam. Right. So, you know, it was a serious matter, too.
Yeah.
I don't mean to make fun of that
Certainly.
in any way, but just for myself.
Of course.
An example of willing to take risks when something seemed to be so terribly out of sorts with my personality and who I was.
So can you tell me in terms of that's a great story. By the way, I can just see you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and also, of course, they spotted this weapon immediately, right? Because.
I should have had it, and he knew it was a defiant act. See, that's why it sort of got him so aroused and upset. And then I was probably not in any way contrite about it.
That must have been the
hey,
nail in the coffin.
Yeah, you're out of here. You don't need this kind of
Sure.
Because you're an intelligent college student. You're not some recruit from hillbilly town.
And you're not looking to be molded by somebody else.
Right.
Right.
So he knew that I was going to continue. He had the foresight to see that I was a problem.
How did you balance your serious interest and your appetite to study with the sort of with this intuition about who to listen to and who not to listen to? When you talk about this teacher trying to steer you in a certain direction, sometimes when people don't take direction and they're not teachable, they're not coachable, it doesn't sound like that's you at all. It sounds like you had this surprising level of surprising for a younger person. I mean, this discernment about where you wanted to seek your knowledge from and who was trying to force you in a square peg into a round hole. How do you kind of account for that?
Okay. I think what happened was I began to see, as soon as I started college and grew a beard, and I was the only beard on college for several years, and it just pissed off the Jesuit fathers who ran the college.
Is that right?
Because it was certainly not within their purview to tell me not to grow a beard, but they resented the fact that I was bringing a different element into the campus. And when the Haight-Ashbury started up in the Summer of Love, my favorite time, my favorite decade of my life, I was running the literary magazine on campus.
Oh, wow.
And would invite all these hippies into my office, and it was kind of a place for all kinds of activity, none of which was authorized or accepted by the university.
I can read between the lines here, I think, maybe.
So yeah, so the main priest, president of the university, took me aside one day. He said, "Listen," he said, "it's great that you're running this literary magazine." He says, and I don't agree with your personal philosophy of things, but he says, we're going to get along if you grant me the respect that you should and do what you're supposed to do in terms of coursework, matriculating in the four-year program. So we sort of had a meeting of the minds. Very bright Italian guy, and very well respected in the community, and very bright, very sharp. So I figured, okay, I'll play this game. But along the way, there were glitches, there were mishaps. But finally, I noticed in the paper about a year ago that this priest passed away at 96 years old.
Wow.
And I was saddened, but at the same time, I was a little upset because I wanted to have another go around with him as mature adults,
I see.
even though he was much my senior. But
right.
so the opportunity for showing my individuality happened sometimes without my even knowing it, because I would stay firm to my beliefs. And another example is we used to all go drinking underage, drinking at 19 years old, maybe in a bar. And
Never heard of it.
Well, yeah, no, this is not unusual. This was not unusual, but we were flaunting it. See?
I see.
And just going to places where we had established ourselves and just continuing to drink and carouse and have wonderful times. And then many of us were caught. and it was very embarrassing because the folks found out in many cases
Right.
how embarrassing you're trying to pretend like you're an older person, and here you are drinking to excess. So it could have led to a different kind of life. I'm glad that I sort of picked myself up from that.
It seems like you flirted with it, but that's not
Yeah,
really...
flirted with it,
yeah.
yes. Flirted with a lot of paths along the way. And I think art, maybe looking back now, my art is better for having had these episodes, for having the clashes with individuals, for having the opportunity to stick to my guns when I felt that it was right, whatever it might be in life.
And did that feel right in the moment, or in retrospect? Because sometimes people look back and they kind of forgive themselves, or they see it through wiser eyes.
Right.
But what I'm gathering is that even in the moment, you sort of knew that was the right thing to do, or at least that you couldn't be bothered to do otherwise. Even then.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's a mixture of those two thoughts.
Yeah.
But I have to say, for the most part, that I stood my ground.
Yeah.
Right or wrong. And looking back, I'd say, okay, that's a good deal.
Yeah.
That's a good thing. My father was a man with tremendous integrity. And so he was a model for me, and I didn't realize it then. It had to be a time for him to pass before I thought to myself, hey, Dad, you were right 95% of the time, and I was wrong. And so those kind of moments are very chilling, and they're very pregnant with emotion. A quick example, if I might, about what I mean by integrity.
Yeah.
One time, the four of us, my sister, I, Mom and Dad, had a nice dinner in North Beach, and my dad paid the bill, and as often he would do, and we came home, and then he was in the living room, and I noticed him looking at the receipt. I said, Dad, what's wrong? Is there some mistake? He said, well, he said, it looks like they undercharged us about $15. I said, what do you mean? Well, it looks, we should have paid $15 more. And I said, well, gee, Dad, that's kind of that's kind of all right. Sometimes we get overcharged. And I could tell that didn't please him. So the next day, it was a Saturday, he got up, went down to the restaurant. He knew the owner, and he said, hey, Tony, you undercharged us $50. It's kind of an emotional story for me. And the guy said, what? He says, in 40 years of business, no one has ever said that I've undercharged them. They always said I've overcharged them. He says, forget about it. Let me buy you a drink. And you come in here anytime.
It's a beautiful story.
You're welcome. No reservations, nothing. So this kind of thing would be in my life, and I didn't really see it. On Saturdays, he was told he worked for the Bank of America, and so this was in the 50s now. They said, "Oh, you have to come in on Saturday for a half day," and he said, "Okay." And I said, "Gee, Dad, it's a bummer. You work 5 days a week." He says, "It's part of the job." And he did that for maybe 3 years. Never griping. Always did it. That was part of the job.
Yeah. And it seems like someone who just shows up 100%.
Yeah.
And isn't looking for a corner to be cut here and there.
No pat on the back.
Right. And just very much in earnest.
Yeah, because that was the training he had from his Italian parents from the old country. So this was just proper behavior.
Now, what do you think about the?
I'm sure we're getting off the track.
That's no.
But
yeah. I mean, yes and no. I mean, I don't really think that off track. I wonder what that really means. Because we're talking about things that inform creativity and sort of knowing your path to be what it is, and how someone comes to the kind of resolve, so almost unshakable resolve in their gut instincts and knowing what the road ahead of them, what it's paved with and where it's leading.
Yeah.
You know, and I just from those anecdotes, I think so much of that must come from your upbringing and the example of your father as somebody who, I mean, most people would be as even as you expressed in the story, would be happy to be undercharged. And would be happy to let that go.
Well, I must say, I was.
Sure.
That was my reaction.
Sure.
Dad, we're often, it's the other way around. So
Sure.
take it as a windfall.
What I love about that story so much is that it shows how much more, let's say the advantage of coming clean with it and the goodwill that engenders versus the little extra that you sneak away with by not talking about it, and people really get that backwards.
Exactly.
And I imagine that must translate in some ways, and tell me if I'm sort of playing some sophistry here, but I imagine that the short-term, let's say, comfort of accommodating the, let me say it better, caving to the pressures of your demagogue teachers. They want to push you into this narrow, push you into an image that they have for you already.
Right.
That you could have played the game and avoided a lot of conflict, but you wouldn't have been true to yourself and your own values.
I think yes.
Is there an analog there,
yes,
or is that a bit of a?
Yes, there is. Mm-hmm. There is. I remember one of my teachers in art class, again in college, said, if anyone uses pink in this classroom, you'll get an F.
An F for pink. Wow.
So I wouldn't use pink exactly, but I made sure that I was working in a range of reds and oranges.
No, that's fine.
So I'd sort of some close to that.
Lots of sunsets and
see how much
sunsets in Bologna, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Vibrant suns and things like that.
Oh my goodness.
But yeah.
Right. Don't think of purple elephants. Well, okay. I'm already.
I think that when you encounter that kind of absolute sense of you're forced into accepting rigid confinement. It's not right. The teacher in grammar school who would say, "Okay, we're going to draw trees today," and then point out to the young girl who did a red tree. No, that's not right. You can't have a red tree. Well, of course you can have a red tree. And Matisse would have a red tree, and so would Gauguin, and so would Picasso.
Right.
And what do you mean?
Right. Why is it that there can or can't be a color on a piece of paper?
Right.
What is the reason that you can't have it exactly?
Yeah,
What's the threat? What's the cost?
Sure.
Except to conformity, right?
Exactly.
But also,
Or don't go outside of the lines when you're coloring.
Mm-hmm.
Well, whose lines are those? They're not mine. Anyway.
Well, but it also seems to me that what that speaks to is, teachers and parents too, ought to be preparing children to operate in a peer-to-peer dynamic.
Right.
So because they might be children today, but they're going to be adults eventually.
Sure.
One can only hope. And so if you speak to them as close to peer-to-peer as possible, that's promoting that in adulthood. Right. And I think that aversion to being spoken to as almost as someone who's sort of subjugated by this authority, that doesn't. I think you must have had a very kind of inborn sense of individuality.
I think so. Yes. Now when I look back at that, also when you tell a child that your tree is wrong, you're not only affecting his sense of art or his creativity, you're telling him that he's not right.
That's because it's coming from within
You're
you.
not
your
okay.
ideas.
You're not okay, Tommy, to do
Yeah.
that. To go out of the lines, Nancy. That's very bad. So now you're not just a kid trying to do art. You're a bad child. There's something wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm very sensitive to that, especially when I see children. And sometimes I think maybe what I should have done is find I should have found a route to be with children in an art setting, because I could think of nothing grander than having kids create art, or when a kid comes up to my art and I say, Tommy, what do you think? And he says, that's a beautiful moon. I like that.
And to validate their opinions.
What praise from an innocent, honest, young creature.
They'll give it to you straight.
They'll give it to you straight.
They will.
Whether, warts and all.
Oh. Yeah, I asked my daughter
Grandma,
about,
why are you sweating so much? How come you have hair on your chin, Grandma?
You know, my brother, when we were just kids, got up and retold some joke that was told at a dinner party in front of a large group. And my parents were sweating bullets.
Yeah.
And it turns out that he just remembered it incorrectly.
Oh, okay.
Much to the relief of all of us. It was kind of a dirty joke.
Oh, okay. So you didn't get the right punchline.
Yeah, he got the punchline that his brain could remember.
Okay.
Thank goodness.
Cool.
I think where this is sort of where we are, and I think this we might be getting to at least the end of the first round of this. But I think this is what we've been talking about. I think leads really organically into, what do you think that your purpose is as an artist?
Oh, great. That's a great question, and I'm still thinking about that.
You got plenty of time left.
I hope.
I hope so.
But what I really want to do is to have people look at things in life in a separate way, in a new way perhaps, as if they hadn't seen it before, and maybe show them something that will resonate with them personally. And again, when you ask me about personal art for someone, I always try to look at what that person's about, or something that I really like about that person, and reflect that in the gift in the piece of art. I think that I'm trying to bring some happiness and some joy.
That comes through in what I've seen of yours.
Thank you.
It's vibrant and very
vibrant,
large-hearted in a way. It seems like it has the innocence of a child, but the seriousness of an adult.
Thank you. That's probably the best compliment I could have. The childlike approach with some awareness of being on the planet for 3/4 of a century, and all that means, and all that amounts to, and it's a great deal. It's a great deal. In fact, you can't put it into a box.
The essence of it is to be out of the box.
Yeah, the essence is to be out of the box.
Right.
But I mean, even if I wanted to say, okay, well, here's my high school, here's college, here's my first girlfriend, here's my marriage, here's my involvement with animals and pets, and my involvement with neighbors and friends. This is enormous, and it has to be digested and really reflected on and thought about, and then it turns into the art for me.
So the art is a way of the art is what comes after digesting your life, or
Yes.
is it a way of digesting it in the making?
Both.
I imagine it's both.
Yeah, both. I'm digesting the chicken I had last night and how good it was, and so therefore this particular abstract piece in this painting is my chicken.
Do you find
or this is the chicken that was before I ate it.
Before and after, and then way before. What do you find that the abstract? Because most of the work I've seen of yours seems like it's a relaxed realism. It's not totally abstract. It's not totally expressionistic. It's not wild or surrealist. But it's a kind of how do I say this? It's sort of like a very relaxed realism. If that makes sense. I'm sure that's not a term. I'm sure I'm just talking out of my elbow. But it seems like you know what you're looking at.
Yeah.
You know that you're not being asked. It's not like a Salvador Dali where you're being told this object is being distorted. You know what you're looking at, and
persistence of memory.
Yeah.
The clock that's folding off the table. Yeah.
It seems like that approach leaves more room for the viewer to experience it in their own way without seeing that as divergent or transgressive of what you intended.
Yeah.
I think when you have totally realistic, high degree of realism, it's pretty obvious how you should look at it, what you should think about it. It is what it is, and maybe that's just sort of less inviting or less flexible?
I would want to show you at some point, and perhaps we can expand the video with periods of work that represent all the things that I've discussed.
That would be fantastic.
But I really want to say that the abstract is always with me, but I tend to gravitate more toward what I call super realism.
Oh, okay.
In other words, it's not just a cat or a dog, it's a dog or a cat with jewelry and with an aura and with the royalty and a specialness denoted by bright color and vibrant color.
Iconographic art
Yes,
from your Catholic has some influence on that?
Right.
Because when you describe it, that's what I think of right away.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. But we must do that. We must complement this wonderful video and future videos with segments of work. So I wonder if we could probably get set up in a. We might have to do an indoor situation to protect the art. And,
right.
To give us, you know.
We can
freedom.
talk about logistics and things like that, and we can certainly figure that out.
Sure.
Just for the time being, it's a question that I fear that I might not get to if we come back to it. But do you feel that art should have a social or political purpose? Or should it have a message? You know, what's your philosophy about? Because a lot of art seems to get caught up in movements.
Sure.
And the tenor of the times.
Yes.
Do you have a philosophy about that?
I do, very strongly, yeah. I think there's a place for it. Some artists I know personally are political artists, satirists, for example. I think it's more the job